All right, welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling a pretty foundational topic.
Yeah, this one.
We always try to pick subjects
Mm-hmm.
that really kind of get to the heart of things.
Exactly.
And for anyone out there, especially our listeners
Mm-hmm.
who really enjoy philosophy,
Yes.
I think this one's going to be especially interesting.
Absolutely.
We're talking about Aristotle,
Yeah.
specifically his theory of causality.
Causality, yeah.
We're not just asking, like, why things happen,
Right.
in a sort of everyday sense.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at how one of history's greatest thinkers really wrestled with this question of why
Yeah.
in a deep, like really systematic way.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Aristotle,
Mm.
we're talking about a thinker who laid the groundwork for so much of Western philosophy.
Exactly.
And his approach to causality, his attempt to really dissect and categorize the different ways we can answer that question, why it's still incredibly relevant today, especially for anyone trying to understand, the nature of explanation itself.
Right.
So for this deep dive, we've been digging into the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Yeah, a classic resource.
A fantastic resource, absolutely.
And we're going to try and, pull out the key insights
Right.
on Aristotle's theory of causality.
And present them in a way that,
Yeah.
resonates with our listeners, especially those who are drawn to these, these big philosophical questions.
Yeah.
The kind of questions that keep you up at night.
Right.
So to give you a roadmap for where we're headed,
Okay.
we're going to start by setting the stage,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the intellectual landscape that Aristotle was responding to.
Right. So, like, what was going on in philosophy and science?
Yeah, what were the prevailing ideas about causality that were kind of floating around before Aristotle came along?
Right.
And then we're going to dive into the heart of his theory, the four causes.
Ah.
The material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. We'll really unpack each of these and see how they apply to both the things we make, the artificial world and the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll delve into Aristotle's defense of final causes.
Yeah.
This idea that purpose plays a crucial role in explanation.
Mm.
And why he considered these final causes to be, in a sense, the most important, the most explanatory of the four.
Okay.
And then to wrap things up, we'll even take a look at a specific event, a lunar eclipse,
Oh, cool.
to illustrate how Aristotle's framework
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always require all four causes to provide a satisfactory explanation.
Okay.
So there's a lot to unpack here. But
Yeah.
knowing your philosophical leanings, I have a feeling you'll appreciate the rigor and the systematicity of Aristotle's approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that even before Aristotle,
Right.
thinkers were really struggling with this question of why things are the way they are.
Absolutely.
Like, what makes things come into being?
Mm-hmm.
What causes them to change, to disappear?
Yeah.
This desire to kind of peek behind the curtain of reality.
Yeah.
It's a thread that runs through early philosophy and science, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
I mean, Aristotle himself recognized this.
He did.
Right. He acknowledged that his predecessors were also searching for causes.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to find explanations for the world around them.
Exactly. And he gives credit where credit is due. He acknowledges that they had already identified some of the key types of causes.
Right, like material,
Formal.
efficient,
Okay.
and even something resembling a final cause.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's not like Aristotle invented the concept of causality out of thin air.
Right.
He was building
Building on
on existing ideas.
Yeah, existing ideas, absolutely.
But what's interesting is he also had some, let's say, constructive criticism
He did.
for his predecessor.
He did.
Right. It's not like he just blindly accepted everything they said.
No, not at all.
He had some pretty strong opinions about the state of causal explanation.
He did, and he uses this really vivid analogy
Okay.
to illustrate his point.
Right, let's hear it.
He compares his predecessors to boxers.
Boxers.
Boxers, yeah.
I did not see that coming.
Yeah, so imagine these boxers, they're in the ring.
Okay.
So they're throwing punches,
Right.
but they're doing it haphazardly
Like they haven't trained.
without any real technique.
Okay.
Just kind of swinging wildly.
Gotcha.
And sure, every now and then they might land a lucky punch. They might stumble upon a valuable insight about a particular cause.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But what they lack
Hmm.
is a systematic understanding.
Okay.
They don't have a refined method.
Right.
They're talking about causes, yes,
Hmm.
but they haven't fully grasped the nuances,
Right.
the distinctions, the conceptual clarity that Aristotle thought was necessary.
Yeah, it's like they have the raw materials,
Right.
but they haven't figured out how to assemble them
Exactly.
into a coherent structure.
Into a coherent, a comprehensive theory of causality.
It's a great analogy.
And that's where Aristotle comes in.
Hmm.
He wanted to provide that framework, that toolkit
Right.
that would allow us to really grasp the why of existence in all its complexity.
Okay, so
Yeah.
he's essentially saying, look, my predecessors were onto something,
Right.
but they didn't quite get there.
They didn't quite hit the mark.
It's like they had some pieces of the puzzle,
Mm-hmm.
but they couldn't quite put it all together.
Yeah.
And so he saw it as his mission
Philosophical mission.
to develop a more robust
Right.
and comprehensive theory of causality.
Exactly.
And that led him to his doctrine
His famous doctrine
of the four causes,
of four causes.
which is really the cornerstone of his philosophical system.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we see it laid out in detail. In works like his physics and his metaphysics,
Yeah.
it's the foundation for understanding how he approaches explanation.
It's also a really good example of how Aristotle approached philosophy in general,
Absolutely.
right? Like he was all about creating
Systems,
categories.
classification.
He wanted to bring order to the chaos of human experience.
Right. To create a framework for understanding the world around us, the world within us.
Exactly.
And to do it in a way that was rigorous and logical.
Yeah. And I think for our listeners who are, drawn to philosophy,
Right.
that's one of the things that makes Aristotle so appealing, right?
Absolutely.
It's like he provides us with a mental map,
Yeah, a mental map.
a set of tools for navigating
Exactly.
the complexities of reality.
The complexities of existence.
So let's get down to the specifics here.
Okay, let's dive in.
What are these four causes? Like, how did Aristotle actually define them?
Well, for Aristotle, understanding these four fundamental types of causes
Right.
wasn't just some kind of intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
It was the key
Okay.
to achieving genuine knowledge.
Wow.
He says in the Posterior Analytics
Hmm.
that true knowledge comes when we understand the cause.
Right.
It's not enough to just observe something.
Like I see a tree.
Yeah, you see a tree.
Right.
You see a rock.
Mm.
That's not enough.
Okay.
You have to grasp the underlying why.
Yeah.
Why is the tree there?
Right.
Why is the rock shaped that way?
Right.
What brought it into being?
Okay.
What keeps it in existence?
Yeah.
What causes it to change or to decay?
So it's almost like, to put it in very simple terms, knowing that something exists isn't enough.
Right.
You have to know why it exists
These exact.
to really have knowledge.
Yeah, and Aristotle gives us a framework
Okay.
for understanding the different ways we can answer that why question.
Right. And those are the four causes.
Those are the four causes.
Okay, so let's go through them one by one.
All right, let's do it.
First up, we have the material cause.
The material cause.
And this one seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, at first glance, it seems pretty simple.
It's basically asking, what is something made out of?
What is it made of?
Right. So if you're looking at a table,
Yeah, wooden table.
the material cause would be
The wood.
the wood, right?
Yeah.
But the Stanford Encyclopedia makes a point of saying that the material cause isn't limited to just, physical stuff.
Right, and this is where Aristotle's thinking can get really interesting.
Right.
Because he pushes us to think beyond just the tangible,
Okay.
to see the material cause as the underlying components
Okay.
or constituents of anything,
Okay.
whether it's a physical object or something more abstract.
Okay. Give me an example.
So, for instance, he talks about the syllable B-A,
Okay. B.
and he says the letters A and B.
Right.
Those are the material cause of the syllable.
Okay.
So even in language, even in something that's not a physical object, we can identify a material cause.
It's like the building blocks.
Yeah, it's the stuff that it's made of.
Okay. That makes sense.
So the material cause, it's about identifying the fundamental ingredients, the
Yes.
constituent parts
Yeah.
that make up the whole
Okay. So that's material cause.
material cause check.
Now, what about formal cause?
Right, formal cause.
This one seems a little bit more abstract.
It is a bit more abstract,
Yeah.
but it's equally important.
Okay.
The question here is, what is it?
What is it?
And it's not about what it's made of,
Right.
but rather about its essence,
Essence.
its form, its defining structure,
Okay.
the what it is to be of something.
Okay. So if we go back to the table example,
Yeah.
it's not about the wood itself.
Right.
It's about
It's about the shape of the tables.
the sheet, the
Yeah,
design.
the design, the
fact that it has 4 legs and a flat top,
exact.
that makes it a table.
That's what makes it a table, as opposed to a chair or a pile of wood.
A pile of wood.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like the organizing principle
Exact.
that gives something its specific identity.
Yeah, it's what makes it that specific kind of thing.
And this applies to abstract concepts too, right?
Absolutely.
Not just physical objects.
So think about justice, for example.
Okay, justice.
What is justice? What is its essence?
Right.
What are its defining characteristics?
What makes it different from, say, fairness
Exactly.
or equality?
Yeah.
That's its formal cause.
That's its formal cause.
Okay, so we've got material cause, what something is made of.
Right.
Formal cause, what something is, its essence.
Yeah.
Now what about efficient cause?
The efficient cause, this is about change or motion.
Motion.
Is
Okay.
the question here is, where does the change come from?
Right. Like what sets things in motion?
What initiates the process?
Great.
What is the source of the change?
So if we think about our table again,
Yeah.
the efficient cause would be
The carpenter.
the carpenter who built it.
Or more precisely.
The carpenter's actions.
Actions. Okay.
Yeah, the sawing, the hammering,
The measuring, the sanding.
all of those actions.
Yeah.
Those are the efficient cause of the table coming into being.
Okay, so it's not just the agent,
Right.
like the carpenters.
It's not just the person.
It's the specific actions they take
It's the action.
that bring about the change.
Yeah. It's the actual doing, the bringing about of the change.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the efficient cause,
Mm-hmm.
it's the trigger,
Okay.
the catalyst, the
Yeah.
force that sets things in motion.
Okay. And now for the big one, right?
Agree.
The grand finale.
The final
The
cause.
final cause.
This one is often the most difficult for people to wrap their heads around.
I think so.
Yeah, because it seems to involve this idea of purpose
Purpose, yeah.
or intention,
Intentionality.
and that can get tricky.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about the natural world.
Right, like does a tree have a purpose?
Right. Does a rock have an intention?
We'll get to that, but for now,
Yeah, we'll get there.
let's just define what Aristotle meant by final cause.
Okay.
So the question here is, what is its good?
What is its good?
Or what is that for the sake of which something is done or takes place?
Right. What is the end goal?
The end goal,
The aim.
the purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to our trusty table example.
Okay, the table.
What would be the final cause of the table?
The final cause of the table is to be a table.
To be a table, okay.
Yeah, to fulfill its function
Okay.
as a surface for eating, working,
Right.
playing games.
Putting things on. So
Yeah.
it's like the reason the table exists in the first place
Exactly. The reason it was created
is to serve that purpose.
to serve that function, to be that kind of thing.
Okay, so it's not just about the physical process of making the table.
Oh, right.
It's about the ultimate goal,
Yeah.
the reason behind it.
Why behind the...
And this is where it can get a little mind-bending.
Yeah.
Because when we apply this to the natural world,
Right.
it starts to sound like we're saying that, trees and rocks have intentions.
Right, like they're consciously striving towards something.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not quite what Aristotle had in mind.
Okay, so how do we make sense of this idea of final cause in nature?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
I think the best way to understand it is to look at one of Aristotle's classic examples,
Yeah.
the bronze statue.
Okay, the bronze statue, we talked about that before.
Right, because it nicely illustrates all 4 causes.
Right, and it's also a really good way to see how the final cause works.
Absolutely.
So let's break it down.
All right, so first, the material cause of the bronze statue.
That's the bronze itself.
Yeah, bronze, yeah.
Right, the physical material it's made of.
It's what undergoes the transformation.
Okay.
It's what gets melted, shaped.
Right.
It's the stuff that the statue is made out of.
Okay, so far so good. Now what about the formal cause?
Formal cause.
What is that in the case of the statue?
The formal cause of the statue is its shape,
Its shape.
its particular form,
Okay.
the way the bronze is arranged to
Yeah.
create the likeness
Mm-hmm.
of whatever the statue is depicting.
So if it's a statue of a person,
Yeah,
the formal cause is the specific arrangement of the bronze.
right.
That makes it look like that person.
The contours, the details, the features.
Okay, so the formal cause is kind of like the blueprint,
Yeah, the blueprint, the design.
the idea that's being expressed in the bronze.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, now what about the efficient cause?
The efficient cause, here it gets interesting
Yeah,
because you might think, oh, the efficient cause is the sculptor.
Right, the person who made the statue.
Yeah, the one who's chiseling away.
Right, but Aristotle says
Mhm.
it's not quite that simple.
It's more nuanced than that.
So what is the efficient cause? according to Aristotle?
He says the primary efficient cause is the art of bronze casting.
The art of bronze casting.
Yeah, and this is where we see Aristotle's emphasis on knowledge
Okay.
and skill.
As opposed to just the individual person
Exactly.
who's doing the work.
He sees the sculptor as someone who embodies
Right.
this specific body of knowledge, this art of bronze casting.
And the art of bronze casting is like
Yeah.
all of the techniques,
Technique.
the knowledge
That
you need to actually create a bronze statue.
Right. It's not just about having a chisel and a hammer. It's about knowing how to use them, knowing the properties of bronze,
Right.
knowing how to melt it,
How to shape it.
how to mold it,
All of that stuff.
all of that.
So the art of bronze casting is like a set of instructions.
Yeah, like a blueprint for action.
Okay.
And it's that blueprint.
That Aristotle sees as the true efficient cause.
Right.
Because it's what actually explained how the statue is made.
It's the knowledge that guides the process.
Okay, I get.
So it's a subtle distinction, but it's an important one.
It highlights how Aristotle was always trying to get to the most fundamental level of explanation.
Yeah. He's not satisfied with just saying, oh, the sculptor made the statue.
Right.
He wants to know what makes the sculptor capable of making the statue.
Exactly.
What is the underlying knowledge and skill that makes that possible?
And that's the art of bronze casting.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered material, formal, and efficient cause.
Right.
Now, what about the final cause of the statue?
The final cause, this is the big one.
Yeah.
Because here we're talking about purpose,
Purpose of.
intention.
Okay.
And when we're talking about a human creation like a statue, it's a little easier to see how this works.
It is.
Because we know that humans have intentions.
Right. We create things for a reason.
Exactly.
We have goals in mind.
So what would be the final cause of the bronze statue?
According to Aristotle,
The final cause of the bronze statue is the statue itself.
the statue itself.
Yeah, the completed artifact.
Okay, so it's not like the statue has some other purpose.
Right. It's not like it's supposed to be a doorstop or a paperweight.
Right.
The purpose of the statue is to be a statue.
To be a statue. Okay.
Yeah, to fulfill its function as a work of art.
Okay.
To be an object of beauty, perhaps.
Or to commemorate someone.
To commemorate someone or an event.
Tell a story.
Exactly.
So the final cause is like the ultimate reason
Right.
why all of the other causes came together.
Yeah, it's what everything is directed towards.
Okay, so the bronze was acquired for the sake of making the statue.
Right.
The sculptor learned the art of bronze casting for the sake of making the statue.
Yeah.
The sculptor took all those specific actions, the chiseling, the melting, the molding, for the sake of making the statue.
Exactly.
And the final result, the statue itself, is the embodiment of that purpose.
Yeah, it's the realization of the final cause.
Okay, so now that we've seen how this works with a bronze statue, how do we apply this to the natural world?
Right, that's the million-dollar question.
Because it's not like trees and rocks have intentions in the same way that humans do.
Exactly. They're not consciously choosing to be a certain way.
Right.
But Aristotle still thought that final causes were essential for understanding nature.
Okay, and the Stanford Encyclopedia gives us a few clues
It does.
as to how he made sense of this.
Yeah, it talks about how in nature, the form and the end often coincide.
The form and the end coincide.
And they share a formal similarity with the efficient cause.
Okay, this is getting a little complex.
It is, but stick with me
I'm trying.
because it's worth it.
Okay?
Aristotle gives us this really concise and powerful statement.
Okay.
He says, it takes a human being to generate a human being.
Okay. It takes a human being to generate a human being.
Yeah, and this might seem obvious at first,
It does.
but it's actually packed with philosophical significance.
Okay, break it down for me.
All right, so think about the process of human reproduction.
Okay.
The fully developed human being.
The parent.
Yeah, the parent represents the end,
Okay.
the realized form that the generative process aims towards.
Right. The goal is to create another fully developed human being.
Exactly.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's also a fully developed human being.
The parent.
The parent
Right.
that initiates this process,
Okay.
that acts as the efficient cause.
So the parent is both the end goal
Yeah.
and the starting point.
In a sense, yes.
Okay, I see.
They share the same fundamental form
Okay.
or species essence.
Right. They're both human beings.
Okay.
So when we're trying to understand how a human being is generated,
Yeah.
we need to understand both the starting point
Mm-hmm.
and the end goal.
Right.
And in this case,
Mm-hmm.
they're both human beings,
They are.
which means that the form of a human being is kind of like baked into the entire process.
Yeah, it's both the blueprint and the finished product.
Okay, so how does this relate to final causes in nature more broadly?
Well, it suggests that even though natural things like trees and rocks
Right.
don't have conscious intentions in the same way that humans do, they still have inherent ends or outcomes
Okay.
that explain their development and their characteristics.
Okay, so it's not about intention in the psychological sense.
Right.
It's about
It's about directedness.
directedness.
Yeah, there's a kind of built-in aim
Okay.
or purpose.
It's a natural process.
Natural processes to the way things unfold in the world.
Okay, but as you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
this idea of final causes in nature,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't exactly universally accepted.
It wasn't.
Right.
Like,
A lot of Aristotle's predecessors, they were more focused on
yeah.
material and efficient causes.
Material and efficient, the more mechanistic explanations.
Yeah, so how did Aristotle defend his inclusion of final causes?
Well, he lays out his most comprehensive defense in Physics 2:8.
Okay.
And it's important to note that he's not presenting this as a strict logical proof.
Okay.
It's more of an argument that shows
Okay.
that explanations relying solely on material and efficient causes,
Right.
they just don't cut it
Okay.
when you're trying to account for the regularity that we observe in nature.
The regularity, okay.
Yeah, the consistent patterns, the way that things tend to unfold in predictable ways.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure, he uses the example of rain.
Rain, okay.
So rain happens because of specific material processes.
Right, like evaporation and condensation.
Exactly. Warm air rises, it cools, the water vapor condenses,
Forms clouds.
and
then it rains.
then it rains.
Okay.
And it might happen that this rain benefits crops.
Right, helps them grow.
Yeah, provides the water they need.
Okay.
But the rain didn't fall for the sake of the crops.
Right, it's just a coincidence.
It's a coincidence, yeah.
Okay.
The rain has its own causes.
And the fact that it happens to benefit the crops,
Right.
that's just a lucky break.
Okay, so someone who only believes in material and efficient causes,
Yeah.
they might say, look, this is how all of nature works.
Right.
It's just a bunch of
A
coincidences.
series of accidents?
Things bumping into each other.
Yeah. Random interactions.
And sometimes those interactions produce something beneficial.
Right.
Sometimes they don't.
But there's no purpose,
No plan.
no design,
No final cause.
no final cause.
Okay, so how did Aristotle respond to that?